The Galactic Integration Bureau processed 12 million species assignments every single day. And nobody thought twice about the small human girl whose file landed on the wrong desk at the wrong time. Her name was Yoon Seo-yun, and she had applied for a cultural exchange program that would send her to a peaceful agricultural world where she could study alien botany and learn about cross-species cooperation instead. A tired clerical drone with 4 arms and compound eyes made a single keystroke error that changed everything. The drone coded Seo-yun as a Kethrani, a species known throughout the galaxy for their regenerative abilities and toxic blood. And her application automatically routed to the most prestigious and deadly institution in 3-star systems. Varax's Combat Institute accepted only the strongest candidates from the most dangerous species, and its average mortality rate exceeded 40% before graduation when the acceptance letter arrived on Earth. Seo-yun read it with confusion, but assumed the military terminology was simply a translation quirk. She packed her bags with the same items she always brought on difficult trips: emergency supplies, a small toolkit, dried snacks from her grandmother, and the stubborn optimism that had carried her through every challenge in her 22 years of life. Transport ship deposited her on a world of black stone and red sky, where the air tasted like metal and the gravity pressed down harder than anything she had experienced before she walked through the academy gates with her single bag over her shoulder. And every creature she passed turned to stare at the soft, small being who had somehow wandered into the wrong nightmare. The other cadets towered over her with scales and claws and natural armor that could deflect plasma fire. Some had blade arms that folded against their bodies like weapons waiting to be drawn, and others moved on legs, designed for sprinting across battlefields at speeds no human could match. Yoon smiled politely at each of them and asked for directions to the orientation hall. The orientation speech was delivered by a creature called Instructor Morvax, whose voice sounded like grinding rocks and whose body was covered in scars that told stories of countless battles survived. He spoke of honor and duty and acceptable casualties, explaining that weakness would be purged from their ranks through trials designed to separate the worthy from the dead. Seo-yun listened carefully and took notes in a small book she had brought from Earth, occasionally nodding as if she understood what any of this had to do with studying alien plants. When the speech ended, the cadets were divided into squads of 5. Seo-yun found herself standing with 4 aliens who looked at her the way a wolf might look at a rabbit that had accidentally joined its pack. The first was Crix, a reptilian Sathani whose scales shifted colors based on his emotions, and right now they burned a deep skeptical orange. The second was Thala, a massive insectoid whose mandibles clicked with barely concealed amusement at the joke the universe had played on their squad. The third was Ven, a silent predator from a nocturnal world, whose eyes reflected light like mirrors and whose species communicated primarily through ultraviolet patterns. Seo-yun could not see. The fourth was Dark, a young Varax whose blade arms had not yet fully developed, but whose pride burned as hot as any veteran warrior. They stood in a circle around Seo-yun, and Crix spoke first. "What species are you, small one?" he asked, his translator rendering his hissing voice into flat mechanical words. "Human," Seo-yun replied with a friendly smile. "From Earth, in the Sol system, and I am very happy to meet all of you." Crix's scales flickered to a confused purple. "I have never heard of humans," he admitted. "But you do not look like you belong here." "The paperwork says I do," Seo-yun answered, pulling out her acceptance letter and showing it to the group. Doric snatched the letter and read it with growing disbelief. "This says you are Kethrani," he said slowly, "but you are clearly not Kethrani, because Kethrani are twice your size and their skin secretes acid." Seo-yun looked at the letter again and shrugged. "Maybe there are different types of Kethrani," she suggested. Like how humans come in different sizes, too. The squad exchanged glances that communicated a shared certainty. This creature would not survive the first week, Commandant Threnvok observed. The new cadets from his tower overlooking the courtyard, his ancient eyes scanning the crowds with the patience of a predator who had hunted across 100 worlds. He noticed the human immediately, not because she stood out physically, but because she did not react the way prey should react when surrounded by predators. She smiled. She made conversation. She acted as if she belonged in a place where everything was designed to kill things exactly like her. Threnvok pulled up her file and read the Kethrani designation with a flicker of amusement. Someone in the Integration Bureau had made an amusing error, and he considered correcting it and sending the small creature home before she became a statistic. But something in her body language made him pause. Something in the way she stood relaxed among killers without showing fear. He decided to wait and watch. The first assessment was announced that evening. A 72-hour survival trial in the Ashfall Wastes, a volcanic hellscape where the ground could melt through standard armor, and the predators had evolved to hunt beings far more dangerous than any. Humancio and his squad gathered in their barracks to prepare, and Crix made his prediction loud enough for everyone to hear. "I give her 6 hours," he said, his scales flickering with grim certainty. "Maybe 8 if she finds somewhere to hide." Thala clicked her mandibles in agreement. "And even quiet." Ven flashed a pattern that probably meant the same thing. Seo Yun ignored them and began unpacking her. Badshi pulled out her toolkit and started modifying the oversized equipment the Academy had issued her, cutting straps and repositioning buckles and adding padding from her spare clothes until the gear fit her small frame. Her squad mates watched in silence as she worked with practiced efficiency, her hands moving with the confidence of someone who had solved similar problems many times before. "What are you doing?" Doric finally asked. "Preparing," Seo Yun answered without looking up. "Because the equipment they gave me was made for someone else, and I needed to work for me." She finished her modifications and tested the fit, nodding with satisfaction. Then she opened her grandmother's container of dried snacks and offered them to her squad mates with a warm smile. "Would anyone like some?" she asked. "They are very good for long trips, and my grandmother made them herself." Crix stared at her like she had lost her mind, and perhaps she had. But she kept smiling anyway, because that was what humans did when everything around them seemed impossible. They smiled and they adapted, and they refused to accept that they did not belong. The transport dropped them into hell at dawn, and Zioyun understood immediately why they called it the Ashfall Wastes. The ground was black volcanic rock that radiated heat through her boots, and the sky burned orange with ash that fell like snow made of fire. The air was thick with sulfur and the distant rumbling of mountains that had never stopped erupting since before any species in the galaxy had learned to walk upright. Other squads charged forward the moment they landed, their natural instincts driving them toward action and aggression and the need to dominate their environment through strength. Crix wanted to do the same, his scales burning bright red with competitive energy as he watched rival squads disappear into the wasteland. "We need to move," he hissed, before the others claimed the best hunting grounds and water sources. Xiaoyan held up her hand and shook her head. "Wait," she said calmly. "We need to watch first." "Watch what?" Doric demanded, his blade arms twitching with impatience. "There is nothing here but rocks and death." "Exactly," Xiaoyan replied. "So we need to understand how death moves through this place before we walk into it." She sat down on a boulder and pulled out a small notebook, her eyes scanning the landscape with an intensity that seemed strange on such a soft face. For 30 minutes she watched while her squad mates grew increasingly frustrated. And then she began pointing at things they had not noticed. "Those insects," she said, gesturing toward tiny flying creatures near a distant ridge. "They are clustered in one area, which means water is nearby. Probably underground. She pointed in another direction where the ash fell in strange patterns. The wind shifts there, which means there is a canyon or valley that creates shelter from the heat. Finally, she indicated a series of tracks in the volcanic sand that the others had dismissed as meaningless marks. Something large passed through here recently, moving from the north. And it was limping because the left prints are deeper than the right. Crix stared at her with his scales shifting to confused blue. How do you know these things? The Asked Siohan smiled and closed her notebook. I grew up hiking in mountains, she explained. And my father taught me that nature always tells you what it is doing if you know how to listen. She stood up and pointed toward the ridge with the insects. We go there first for water. Then we find the sheltered valley for a base camp. And we avoid whatever made those tracks until we know more about it. The squad followed her lead because they had no better plan. And within 3 hours, they had found a small spring hidden beneath an overhang of rock that protected it. From the falling ash, other squads would spend the entire first day searching for water while growing weaker. But Ziyun's squad drank their fill and rested in shade. While the volcanic sun blazed overhead, by nightfall they had established a camp in the valley she had identified, using volcanic glass and heat-resistant plants to build shelter that kept them cool while temperatures outside climbed high enough to cook. Methala clicked her mandibles in what Elyuan had learned was appreciation. You are strange, the insectoid admitted, but useful. The second day brought the predators. They encountered the first one at midday, a creature with 6 legs and jaws that could bite through starship hull plating. Its body covered in scales that glowed with internal heat. Crix immediately dropped into a combat stance, his claws extended and his scales burning aggressive red. I will distract it while you others flank from the sides, he announced, already calculating his attack. No, Seoyun said firmly, grabbing his arm with surprising strength for someone so small. It is too big and too fast, she explained, and if we fight it here in the open, someone will die even if we win. She pointed toward a narrow crack in the nearby rock face. We go there instead, where it cannot follow, and we wait. Wait for what? Darik demanded, his pride wounded by the suggestion of retreat. Wait for it to leave, Seoyun answered. Because predators do not waste energy on prey they cannot catch. The squad squeezed into the crack while the creature circled outside, its hot breath washing over them as it searched for a way to reach its meal. For 6 hours they waited in darkness while the predator grew frustrated. And finally, it lost interest and wandered away in search of easier prey that night around their small fire. Crix admitted something his pride had prevented him from saying before. On my world, he said slowly, retreating from a predator would bring shame to my entire bloodline. On my world, Seoyun replied gently. Surviving to try again tomorrow is considered wisdom. The third day brought the real test. They were crossing a field of cooled lava when the ground began to shake. And from behind a ridge of black stone emerged the largest predator Seoyun had ever seen. It stood taller than their transport ship had been, with armor plating that looked thick enough to stop artillery fire and eyes that burned with ancient hunger. This was an apex predator, the kind of creature that had no natural enemies because nothing on this world could challenge it. The squad scattered and ran, but the creature was faster, cutting off their escape routes with terrifying intelligence until they were cornered against a cliff wall with nowhere left to go. Crix stepped forward, his scales shifting to the deep purple of acceptance. I will hold it here, he announced, while you others climb to safety. No, Seoyun said for the second time, her voice calm despite the monster towering before them. She was staring at the creature with the same focused intensity she had shown when reading the landscape. And something she saw made her smile. Look at its left front leg, she said quietly. Do you see how it favors the right side when it moves? The others looked and noticed for the first time that the creature was indeed moving strangely, shifting its weight away from one leg as if it caused pain. "It is injured," Seo-yun continued. "Probably from a fight with another predator, or maybe from stepping in a lava vent." She pointed at the wound, which was dark and swollen with infection. "That infection will kill it within a day or two," she said with certainty. "So we do not need to fight it, we just need to wait." "Wait?" Doric repeated incredulously. "You want us to wait while that thing stands between us and survival?" Seo-yun nodded and sat down against a cliff wall, pulling out her grandmother's snacks as if they were having a picnic instead of facing death. "It will not attack," she explained, "because attacking requires energy it cannot afford to spend. And its instincts know that even if it kills us, the effort might kill it too." The squad watched in disbelief as the creature paced before them, growling and snapping its jaws, but never quite committing to an attack. Hours passed as the standoff continued, and slowly the creature's movements became weaker. Its breathing more labored. By dawn, it collapsed onto the volcanic rock and did not rise. Again Seo-yun stood up and walked to the fallen predator, kneeling beside it with something like respect in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. Though she knew it could not hear her, then she turned to her squad mates and smiled. "Now, we can finish the trial." They completed the assessment, ranked 3rd overall, and in the monitoring room far above the ashfall wastes, Commandant Threnvok watched the footage of a small human girl who had defeated an apex predator with nothing but patience and observation. He pulled her original file and saw the clerical error clearly now. The simple mistake that had sent this creature to a place where she should have died a dozen times. Over his claw hovered over the correction button that would send her home to safety. Then he remembered her smile as she faced the predator. The same smile she had worn since the moment she arrived. He withdrew his claw and marked her file as under observation. Instead, something about this human was worth watching. Word spread through the academy like fire through dry grass, carried by whispers and disbelieving stares that followed Seo-yun wherever she walked, the human who survived the ashfall. They called her the soft one who waited out an apex predator cadets who had dismissed her as dead weight now watched her with curiosity and something that might have been respect. They approached her in the dining halls and training grounds, asking strange questions about human biology that made her laugh with surprise. "Is it true that your species can run for days without stopping?" asked a Torvani cadet whose 4 legs were built for sprinting, but exhausted quickly. "Not days," Seo-yun admitted, "but many hours. Yes, if we pace ourselves correctly. And you can survive temperatures that would kill most species?" asked another cadet, a crystalline being whose body required constant cold to maintain its structure. "Some temperatures. Within limits," she answered. "Humans are very adaptable to different environments." The cadets exchanged glances that communicated a shared realization. Perhaps there was more to this soft creature than they had assumed. Combat training revealed both her weaknesses and her strengths in equal measure. In direct confrontation, she was hopelessly outmatched, her body lacking the natural weapons and armor that other species possessed from birth. A Tovani cadet named Greth faced her in the sparring ring and broke her arm with a single casual strike. His superior strength turning what should have been a training exercise into a medical emergency. The instructor moved to end the match and call for healers, but Seo-yun held up her unbroken hand. "Wait," she said through gritted teeth, her face pale with pain, but her eyes still focused. She grabbed her broken arm with her good hand and twisted it back into position with a grinding pop that made even the hardened warriors around her wince. Then she wrapped it tightly with strips torn from her training uniform and turned back to face her opponent. "I can continue," she announced. The instructor stared at her for a long moment before ending the match anyway. Not because she was defeated, but because he was disturbed by what he had witnessed. Medical scans later revealed what the Academy physicians found difficult to believe. Human bones would heal completely within weeks. Human tissue regenerated from injuries that would permanently disable most galactic species. And human pain tolerance allowed them to function through damage that would incapacitate beings twice their size, the physicians. Added notes to Seo Yun's file that were read by Commandant Frenvok with growing interest. Persistence predators, the notes concluded. Evolved to outlast rather than overpower. Designed to survive through adaptation rather than dominance. Not everyone celebrated. Seo Yun's growing reputation, a faction of elite cadets, came from the most powerful military families in Virac space. And they saw her success as an insult to bloodlines that had produced warriors for 1,000 generations. Their leader was Vrenna, daughter of Admiral Kethvok, whose family had funded half the Academy's facilities and whose pride could not accept that a soft alien nobody might eclipse the achievements of proper soldiers. Vrenna gathered her allies and made plans. The live-fire exercises were scheduled for the following week. Training sessions where cadets practiced with actual weapons in actual combat conditions. Accidents happened in these exercises. Everyone knew that. And sometimes cadets died from wounds that could not be traced to any specific individual. Seo Yun noticed the hostile stares but said nothing, choosing instead to focus on her training and her squad mates who had become something like friends on the day of the exercise. She found herself separated from her squad almost immediately. The terrain was a weapons testing ground filled with old munitions and automated defense systems. A maze of danger where a single wrong step could trigger explosions or plasma. Fire. Seo Yun realized she was being hunted when she heard the coordinated footsteps closing in from multiple directions. 5 cadets emerged from the smoke and debris, their weapons raised and their faces hidden behind combat masks that would prevent identification. Vran stood at their center, her blade arms extended to full length, and though her mask hid her expression, her voice carried cold satisfaction. The soft one wandered away from her squad, Vrenna announced. Such a tragedy when she stumbled into an active minefield and never came out. Seo Yun did not run or beg or show the fear they expected. Instead, she looked around at the weapons testing ground with the same analytical gaze she had used in the Ashful Wastes, reading the environment like a book written in a language only she could understand. This area has not been cleared in 3 years, she said calmly, which means the old munitions are unstable and the automated systems have degraded to unpredictable states. Vrenna laughed behind her mask. Are you trying to scare us with technical details? She mocked. We are warriors, not engineers afraid of old equipment. Seo Yun smiled the smile that had confused so many beings since her arrival. I am not trying to scare you, she replied. I am trying to warn you, but I can see you will not listen. She turned and ran, not away from her hunters, but deeper into the most dangerous section of the testing ground. Vrenna signaled her group to follow, confident that their superior speed would allow them to catch the fleeing human within moments. They were wrong. Seo Yun moved through the maze with purpose, triggering old sensors and setting off small explosions that forced her pursuers to change direction. She left false trails using debris and torn pieces of her uniform, leading different hunters into different dead ends where they lost sight of each other. She identified the automated defense turrets by the subtle hum of their power sources and maneuvered her pursuers into their targeting zones one by one. Vrenna's allies were forced to abandon the hunt as they triggered traps or found themselves pinned down by ancient weapons that could not distinguish friend from foe. Finally, only Vrenna remained, chasing Seo Yun through a narrow corridor that ended in a sealed blast door. Nowhere left to run, Vrenna announced triumphantly. advancing with her blade arms raised for the kill. Seo Yun turned to face her with that same strange smile. "I was not running away," she explained. "I was leading you here." A red light activated above the blast door as the automated systems detected unauthorized presence in a restricted zone. Defense turrets emerged from hidden panels in the walls, their ancient targeting systems locking on to the only moving figure in the corridor. Reneth elite cadet froze as plasma weapons charged around her, their targeting beams painting her body with deadly light. "If you move," Seo said quietly, "they will fire. And even your armor will not save you from this many weapons at once." She stepped carefully backward, her movements slow enough that the degraded systems did not register her as a threat. "Security will arrive in a few minutes," she continued, "and they will find you here, trapped by your own hunt. And I will be somewhere else entirely." She reached the edge of the corridor and gave Reno one last look. "I did warn you," she said. And then she was gone. Security forces arrived 20 minutes later to find Rena's entire faction trapped in various sections of the testing ground, surrounded by activated defenses that required technical teams to disable. Seo Yun was found sitting calmly in a cleared area nearby, eating a ration bar and watching the chaos with mild interest. Commandant Thren Vok summoned her to his office that evening, his ancient eyes studying her face for answers to questions he had not yet asked. "You knew?" he said finally. "From the beginning. You knew you did not belong here." Seo Yun met his gaze without flinching. "I figured it out during orientation," she admitted. "When the instructor mentioned that Kethrani have toxic blood, and I realized I definitely do not have toxic blood." "Then why did you stay?" Thren Vok demanded. "Why did you not report the error and request transfer to wherever you were actually supposed to go?" Seo Hyun considered the question for a long moment before answering. "Because no one asked if I wanted to leave," she said finally. "And because I looked at this place and thought maybe I could learn something here that I could not learn anywhere else." She smiled again. But this time, Thren Vok recognized what the expression actually meant. It was not confusion or politeness or naivety. It was the smile of someone who had chosen to walk into danger with open eyes and intended to walk out again stronger than before. "You are either very brave or very foolish," Thren Vok concluded. "On Earth," Seo Yun replied, "we have a saying that there is not much difference between the two." The commandant dismissed her with a wave of his claw. But after she left, he sat in silence for a long time, thinking about soft creatures who refused to break and wondering what other surprises this human might have hidden behind her smile. Commandant Thren Vok kept Seo Yun's secret, but changed the way he treated her, assigning challenges that would have crushed ordinary cadets and watching with ancient patience to see how she would respond. The tactical simulations grew harder, the physical trials more demanding, the combat scenarios more complex. And through it all, Seo Yun adapted and persisted in ways that defied everything the Academy understood about military. Training her squad transformed around her without anyone quite noticing. When the change began, Crix no longer questioned her decisions, his scales shifting to calm blue whenever she spoke, trusting her judgment as completely as he trusted his own instincts. Thala protected her flanks in combat exercises with fierce loyalty, her mandibles clicking warnings at anyone who approached too aggressively. Van had learned to communicate with her through gestures and touch since she could not see his ultraviolet patterns. And Doric had stopped boasting about his bloodline and started asking her advice instead. Other cadets noticed and began seeking her out, approaching with questions about strategy and survival and the strange philosophy she brought from her distant world. "How do you stay calm when everything is trying to kill you?" a young Torvani asked one evening in the common area. Seo Yun thought about the question before answering. "On Earth, we have a tradition called meditation," she explained, "where we practice being still and quiet inside ourselves even When the world outside is loud and dangerous, that sounds useless, Totovani replied skeptically. Stillness does not stop enemies from attacking. No, Seo Yun agreed, but it stops fear from making you stupid. And fear makes more warriors die than any enemy ever could. The word spread through the cadet ranks, repeated and discussed, and argued over in barracks and training halls. The midterm assessment arrived with tension crackling through the academy like electricity before storm squads would compete against each other in simulated fleet combat, commanding virtual ships and stations in scenarios designed to test tactical thinking under pressure. Most species receive tactical programming from birth, genetic memories and neural implants that gave them instant access to millennia of military knowledge. Seo Yun had none of these advantages. Her human brain empty of inherited battle strategies and optimized formations. What she had instead was something the Academy had never thought to measure. An ability to read her opponents like she read landscapes, identifying their fears and egos and blind spots through nothing more than careful observation. Her squad entered the simulation chamber for their first match against a team led by a Varax cadet, whose family had produced famous admirals for generations. He commanded his fleet with textbook precision, executing maneuvers drawn from victories won centuries before he was born. Seo Yun watched his opening moves and saw the pattern immediately. He's fighting the last war, she told her squad, repeating strategies that worked against enemies who no longer exist. She ordered her fleet to scatter in apparent chaos, breaking every rule of formation combat, and the Varax cadet responded exactly as she expected. He pursued her scattered ships, confident that his superior tactics would crush her undisciplined approach. But the chaos was not chaos at all. Each of Seo Yun's ships had specific instructions, drawing enemy vessels into positions where they blocked each other's firing lines and creating gaps in the Varax formation that her remaining forces exploited with devastating precision. The match ended in 12 minutes, with the Varax fleet destroyed and Seo Yun's SQUAD advancing to the next round. Victory followed victory as Seo Yun's reputation grew, her squad defeating opponents who should have crushed them through sheer tactical superiority. She did not win by being stronger or faster or more knowledgeable than her enemies. She won by understanding them, by seeing the assumptions they made and the fears they carried and the pride that blinded them to unconventional approaches. The final match brought her face to face with Vrenna once again. The elite cadet had rebuilt her faction after the humiliation in the weapons testing ground, recruiting new allies from families who shared her resentment of the soft creature who had risen too high. Vrenna had studied every one of Seo Yun's matches, analyzing her tactics and preparing counters for every trick the human might attempt. This time, Vrenna announced before the match began, "There will be no environment to manipulate, no traps to lead me into. Just pure tactical combat where superior breeding will triumph over luck." Seo simply smiled and took her position at the command console. The match began with Vrenna executing a flawless opening strategy, her fleet moving with coordinated precision that reflected months of preparation, specifically designed to counter Seo Yun's unconventional approach. Every scattered formation was anticipated, every feint was recognized, every attempt at misdirection was countered before it could develop. After 20 minutes, Seo Yun's fleet was cornered and outnumbered, her remaining ships facing destruction from Vrenna's closing forces. "Surrender," Vrenna demanded over the communication channel, "and perhaps I will let you retain some dignity." Seo Yun leaned forward and activated her own communication channel. "I accept," she said calmly, "and I request a formal negotiation period to discuss terms." Vrenna hesitated, surprised by the easy surrender, but pleased by the prospect of public humiliation. "Granted," she replied. You have 5 minutes to propose terms before I destroy your remaining ships. The negotiation period froze the simulation, preventing either side from moving their forces. While discussions took place, Xiao spent those 5 minutes talking about everything except surrender terms, asking Vrenna about her family history, complimenting her tactical preparation, wondering aloud about the Academy's traditions and ceremonies. Vrenna grew impatient and demanded that Xiao state her terms immediately. My terms, Xiao said slowly, are that you check your fleet positions. Vrenna looked at her tactical display and felt her blood freeze during the negotiation period. While Vrenna's attention was focused on the conversation, Xiaoyun's squad had been working. The simulation prevented ship movement, but it did not prevent changes to targeting computers or communication frequencies or the subtle repositioning of weapons that had already been aimed. When the negotiation period ended and the simulation resumed, every one of Vrenna's ships fired simultaneously, their weapon systems having been quietly realigned to target each other instead of Xiaoyun's fleet. The match ended in seconds with Vrenna's entire armada destroyed by friendly fire. A defeat so absolute and so unexpected that the watching audience sat in stunned silence. Commandant Threnvok rose from his observation platform and walked to the center of the simulation chamber, his presence commanding immediate attention from every cadet in attendance. I have an announcement, he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room. He turned to look directly at Xiao, his ancient eyes unreadable. This cadet, he continued, is not Kethrani as her file indicates. She is human, a species from a small world called Earth that most of you have never heard of. Shocked murmurs rippled through the crowd as cadets stared at Xiao with new confusion. A clerical era center here instead of the cultural exchange program she applied for, Threnvok explained, and rather than correct the mistake, I chose to observe what would happen when a species with no natural weapons and no genetic advantages was placed among the galaxy's deadliest warriors. He paused to let the implications sink in. What I discovered, he continued, is that we have been thinking about combat incorrectly for a very long time. He gestured toward Xiao with respect that surprised everyone who knew him. Humans are not apex predators, he announced. They are something more dangerous. They are apex adapters. Creatures who survive not by being the strongest or the fastest, but by becoming whatever the situation requires them to be before anyone could respond. Alarms began screaming throughout the Academy. Red emergency lights flooded the chamber as automated announcements declared what Threnvok immediately recognized as the worst possible news. A hostile fleet had entered the system. Warships bearing the markings of the Corvith Dominion, ancient enemies of the Varrox, who had chosen this moment to strike at the Academy, where the next generation of military leaders was being trained. All cadets to battle stations, Threnvok commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos with calm authority. This is not a simulation. The Academy is under attack. And today you will learn whether your training has prepared you to fight for your lives. Xiaoyun looked at her squadmates and saw fear in their eyes. The same fear she had seen in the Ashfall Wastes when the apex predator had cornered them against the cliff. She smiled at them the way she always smiled. And somehow that simple expression made them stand a little straighter and breathe a little easier. Stay close to me, she said quietly, and we will get through this together. They believed her, and in that moment, so did she. The Corvith Dominion had planned their attack with patient cruelty, waiting until the Academy hosted its largest class of cadets in a generation before bringing their warships into the system. They knew that killing these future leaders would cripple Vorak's military capability for decades, and they intended to make the slaughter complete. Cadets scrambled through corridors filled with emergency lighting and screaming alarms, their training struggling against terror as the reality of war replaced the safety of simulation. Some ran toward battle stations with weapons they barely knew how to use. Others froze in doorways as their minds failed to process what was happening. And a few simply disappeared into hidden corners to await whatever fate would find them. Sayuan moved through the chaos like a stone in a river. Calm and steady while panic flowed around her, she gathered cadets as she walked, speaking to each one in the same quiet voice she used when facing predators in the Ashfall wastes. "Stay with me," she told them. "Breathe slowly, watch where I walk, do what I do." By the time she reached the central command hub, she had collected nearly 40 cadets from a dozen different species, all of them following the small human who seemed to know what to do when no one else did. Commandant Threnvok was coordinating the defense from the hub, his blade arms dancing across tactical displays as he directed the Academy's limited defensive forces against the incoming fleet. The situation was desperate. The Academy had been designed as a training facility, not a fortress, and its weapons were meant for exercises rather than actual combat against a full Corvith battle group. They could delay but never defeat the enemy. Reinforcements had been called, but the nearest Varax fleet was hours away, and the Corvith would breach the Academy's defenses long before help could arrive. "We need to evacuate the cadets," one of the instructors urged. "Get them to the emergency shelters before the Corvith reach the inner compound." Threnvok shook his head grimly. "The Corvith will find the shelters," he replied. "They have our facility blueprints from intelligence operations years ago, and hiding will only make our cadets easier to kill." "Then what do we do?" the instructor demanded before Threnvok could answer. The first Corvith landing craft breached the outer defenses and disgorged soldiers into the Academy grounds. The enemy moved with brutal efficiency, cutting down automated defenses and any cadets foolish enough to face them in direct combat. Threnvok grabbed a weapon and prepared to lead a counterattack himself. "Hold the inner compound for as long as possible," he ordered. "Buy time for the reinforcements, even if it costs everything we have." He charged toward the breach with a group of instructors and senior cadets, his ancient body moving with the deadly grace of a warrior who had survived 100 battles. Sion watched him go and felt something cold settle in her stomach. She recognized the look in his eyes, the acceptance of death that came when a soldier decided to trade their life for time. The first defensive line crumbled within minutes. Overwhelmed by Corvith numbers and superior firepower, the second line lasted slightly longer before it too was swept away. And then the Corvith were inside the inner compound, moving through corridors that had never been designed to repel. Invader Seo Yun heard the screaming and the weapons fire and the terrible silence that followed each engagement. She heard Threnvok's voice over the communication system, growing weaker as he sustained injuries, but refusing to retreat. And then she heard his voice cut off entirely as something finally brought the ancient warrior down. The command structure dissolved into chaos. Instructors shouted conflicting orders. Cadets fled in different directions, and the organized defense became a scattered series of desperate last stands. Yun looked at the cadets who had gathered around her. 40 young warriors from species that had never trusted each other before this moment, all of them looking at her with the same question in their eyes. What do we do now? She did not have military training or tactical programming or centuries of genetic memory to guide her. She had only the skills that had kept her alive since she arrived at this place: observation, adaptation, and the stubborn refusal to accept that survival was impossible. "Follow me," she said. And she led them into the corridors. She did not try to fight the Corvith directly because she knew that approach would fail. Instead, she used the Academy's architecture against the invaders, leading her group through maintenance passages and ventilation shafts that the enemy's blueprints did not show. She set ambushed in choke points where superior numbers meant nothing, coordinated attacks that struck from unexpected angles and retreated before the Corvith could respond. Her group grew as they moved through the academy, collecting scattered survivors and organizing them into units that could fight and move and survive. Cadets who had never worked together before found themselves following the small human's instructions without question, trusting her calm voice and steady presence when everything else had failed. They found Threnvok collapsed in a corridor, his body torn by Corvith weapons but his ancient heart still beating. Xiao Yan knelt beside him and pressed emergency bandages to his worst wounds, her hands steady despite the blood that soaked through her fingers. "The reinforcements will arrive soon," she told him. "You need to stay alive until then." Threnvok looked up at her with eyes that had seen empires rise and fall. "You should not be here," he rasped. "You should have run when you had the chance. Running was never really my style." Xiao replied with a small smile. She organized her cadets into a bay defensive perimeter around the wounded commandant and prepared to hold their position until help arrived or until they died. Trying, the Corvith commander found them an hour later, his forces having swept through most of the academy and eliminated organized resistance everywhere, except this single corridor where a stubborn group of cadets refused to break. He was a massive creature, even by Corvith standards, his body covered in ceremonial scars that marked victories against a dozen species. He looked at the defenders with contempt, counting their numbers and calculating how quickly his soldiers could eliminate them. "Surrender," he demanded, "and I will grant you quick deaths rather than slow ones." Xiao Yun stepped forward from the defensive line, her small form absurd against the towering enemy commander. "I have a counter-proposal," she said calmly. "You withdraw your forces now, and when the Varax reinforcements arrive, they might let some of you escape." The Corvith commander laughed, a harsh sound like breaking bones. "You are insane," he declared. "There is nothing you can do to stop us." "That may be true," Xiao Yun admitted, "but I am very good at making things expensive for people who underestimate me." She held up a small device she had salvaged from the Academy's armory, a manual detonator connected to the power core of the facility itself. "This academy sits on top of enough stored energy to level everything within 5 kilometers, she explained. "And I have spent the last hour routing that energy to overload if I press this button." The Corvith commander studied her face. Searching for the bluff he was certain he would find, what he saw instead was the same calm smile she had worn when facing the apex predator in the Ashfall Wastes. The smile of someone who had already accepted whatever outcome her choices would bring. "You would die too," he said slowly. "Yes," Xiao Yan agreed. "But your entire invasion force would die with me, and your dominion would lose more soldiers in a single moment than they have lost in years of war." She held his gaze without flinching. "The question is whether my life is worth more to you than all of theirs." The standoff stretched for endless minutes while the Corvith commander calculated odds and weighed costs and tried to understand the strange creature who faced him without fear before he could reach a decision. Proximity alarms screamed throughout the academy. The Varax reinforcement fleet had arrived, dropping out of faster-than-light travel directly above the academy with weapons already firing. Corvith ships exploded in orbit as the rescue force tore through them with the fury of warriors who had arrived expecting to find their children dead. The Corvith commander looked at the tactical display showing his fleet's destruction and made the only rational choice available: retreat. He ordered his forces. All units withdraw to emergency extraction points. The invasion collapsed within minutes as Corvith soldiers fled toward landing craft that were themselves under attack from Varax. Fighter Xiao Yun lowered the detonator and let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. The reinforcements secured the academy within the hour, medics rushing to treat the wounded while soldiers cleared the remaining Corvith from every corner of the facility. Threnvok was carried to the medical bay. His injuries severe but survivable, and he insisted on speaking to Seo Yun before they put him into the healing chambers. "Why did you stay?" he asked, the same question he had asked once before. "You could have escaped with the others. You could have hidden and waited for rescue. But instead you fought." Seo Yun sat beside his bed and considered her answer carefully. "Because I looked at this place," she said finally. "And I saw people who needed someone to show them that survival is not about being the strongest or the fastest." She smiled at him. The same smile that had confused and frustrated, and eventually earned his respect. "Survival is about refusing to quit," she continued. "And that is something humans understand very well.